Welcome to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. The Paris Olympics have ended. We'll look back and we'll look ahead to the Paralympics, Los Angeles Summer Games, and Salt Lake City Winter Games. After losing the GOP primary, Phil Lyman will run as a write-in candidate for Utah governor. And forget the Bear Lake Monster, this Northern Utah jewel faces a bigger threat. Joining me today are Salt Lake Tribune outdoor reporter Julie Jag. Julie, thanks for joining us.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. You're back from, are you still in Paris or you're back from Paris?
I'm back from Paris
Back
now.
from Paris. Okay, very good. We have with us State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
And we'll be joined soon by UPR and Salt Lake Tribune Cache Valley reporter Clarissa Casper. News columnist Robert Gerke not able to join us today. Let's start with you, Julie Jag. So you were in Paris for the Olympics. You have several stories. I just want to start with just an overall view. What especially stood out to you about these games?
Oh, these were, it was, I know that I've heard people, on the TV, I've been catching up on the things that I didn't get to see on the TV since I got back. And I've heard people gushing about them, but they really were great Olympics as far as just the spirit and the beauty of it. I mean, the venues that they used were obviously very old but gorgeous, and had a lot of history behind them, which kind of, I think, lent more to the things that were being done within them, the accomplishments being overtaken inside of them. And yeah, and it was just, perfect weather, a little hot at times, but yeah, just a lot of enthusiasm for the games. And so I think that it was a real comeback for the Olympics, considering what happened in Beijing and Tokyo with the pandemic and them being shut down to crowds.
So you covered the whole Olympics, but with a special focus on Utah athletes. Tell us about some of those. There were quite a few Utah athletes spread across several nations.
Yeah, there were so many athletes out there as far as we had swimmers and divers, rugby players and track athletes and mountain bikers. So yeah, they kind of came from all places. I had there were plenty of athletes to cover, and they gave us so many storylines. A few of them could be credited for setting the tone for some of the successes in the Olympics.
I want to talk about this. This really warmed my heart. The headline here: Why BYU Olympic marathoners stayed at the finish line to give other runners, quote, what I would have wanted to hear, end quote. So tell me about these two gentlemen.
Yeah, so that is Clayton Young and Connor Mance, two former BYU runners that are now pros. And they have been training. Well, so they took 1 and 2 at the Olympic trials, at the U.S. Olympic trials, and they just train. They told me they spend 80% of their time together. They see each other more than they see their wives, I think. So, they're there together all the time. And in fact, like, one of the most heartwarming things that I saw at the Olympics, I saw later, I think Connor posted it, that he was worried that somebody was coming up and catching up the lead pack that he was in, and then he looked back and it was Clayton, and so they exchanged a little high five at the back of the lead pack, which I was just like, that's amazing. Also, Connor, when they went through where you get the food, Connor missed his bottle, which had all of his electrolytes and water in it, and he kind of was stressing out about that. And it turned out that Clayton had picked it up, because he'd actually knocked Clayton's down. So Clayton had picked it up and drank half of it, and then caught up to him and shared the rest with him. So really a team effort by these guys. And then when they got to the end, Clayton was soaking it in as he did with the Olympic trials as well. Connor had finished just ahead of him in 8th, and Clayton finished in 9th. And Clayton was soaking it in, and then had just turned around to congratulate the runners that were coming behind him. And Connor saw this and had gone over to Clayton to congratulate him, and then realized what Clayton was doing. And they just both stuck around for quite a while, I think, to just bring in the other racers and tell them good job, because Connor said that all the volunteers were great, but they were so focused on getting the athletes where they needed to be and helping them if they'd, collapsed at the end or whatever, that no one really said, nice job, good job for completing this race in just over 2 hours.
It reminds me of another story from I don't know if you caught this. You probably did. On the women's side, the marathon, there was a runner from Bhutan who finished a good 2 hours behind many of the others, really struggling, but obviously wanting to finish the race. It looked like the people stayed in the stands. Stands were full. People were running alongside her, encouraging her. That's a very heartwarming story.
Yeah, I heard she had a crowd there to greet her, which is great. And she'd said that her country didn't send her there to start the marathon; they sent her there to finish it. So she did, and I think that like that's amazing for the rest of us to hear. That I can't run a 4-hour marathon probably either, but just to see that even everyday people can maybe run the marathon as well.
Yeah, it's a real spirit of the competition. So, some of these athletes will make the finals, right? Some will even medal. We had some Utah athletes who did that. And some will just run a preliminary heat and their Olympics are over, but I guess they had a good experience.
Yeah, and that's kind of it. I think most of them did the most they could to soak in, everything about the games. A lot of the track athletes, since that happens in the latter part of the Olympics, in the latter part of the 2.5 weeks or whatever it is, they went to the opening ceremony, got drenched, and then went to somewhere else to train. And I think a lot of the climbing athletes did that as well, just to kind of take in that unique experience of floating down the Seine with their team, and then kind of get away and refocus, and then come back, because the Olympic Village isn't a great place to focus, I don't think either. But yeah, I mean, like Haley Batten, she missed out on the opening ceremony, but she made it pay off by bringing home a silver medal, which is the best any U.S. athlete has ever gotten in mountain biking, men or women. So that sometimes those sacrifices are worth it.
Yeah, for sure. There's a BYU runner, Kenneth Rooks, had a shocking silver. Came back from way back in the steeplechase.
Yeah, for anyone who didn't see that race, it's worth queuing up and watching again, because he was really, I mean, at the tail end of this pack, and the pack was bigger than it was supposed to be, if I remember right anyway. But anyway, yeah, just at the tail end, and the pack wasn't too separated, but he definitely, when the cameras would pan out, you wouldn't see, and they'd be focused on the leaders, you wouldn't see him kind of trailing there at the end. And then with a little over a lap to go, he made his move. I think there were 4 barriers and 1 water obstacle left when he made his move, and he moved all the way. I guess he moved to 4th, and then he moved all the way to the front and took over the lead. And not until the final stretch did the defending Olympic champion overtake him. But he surprised everybody, I think, by coming up.
Grant Fisher, I think, got a medal in the 10,000 meters. Again, kind of surprising.
Yeah, he actually medaled in both the 10,000 and the 5,000. And so he moved to Park City about a year ago to be part of this Run Elite program, which we've discussed before, but which pays runners to stay in the state, to train in the state, and then they can get whatever shoe contracts or coaches they want, but it kind of keeps them here. And so he moved to Park City to take part in that, and also the high altitude training there. And he he took the bronze in the 10,000, which was the first Saturday of the track. And that was, that was the first, well, not the first. So it was one of only 4 medals that the U.S. has won in 100 years in the 10,000. So it was pretty rare that he did that, and he was not expected to in any manner. And so a lot of the athletes later, were the longer distance athletes, were saying that inspired them. The U.S. athletes were saying that inspired them to think that they could medal even if their chances weren't very good. And then he came full circle the following Saturday, so a week later, and ran the 5,000, and again took bronze in a very similar manner, and became the first American to man or woman to ever medal in both the 10,000 and the 5,000.
You had a story on why BYU has so many track athletes at the Olympics. What? Why?
Even though I wrote that story, I feel like I didn't quite drill down into it, but a lot has to do with Ed Eyestone and Diljit Taylor. They're both have really built strong bonds with their athletes as they're coming up through BYU. Eyestone is a two-time marathon Olympian, so he kind of knows how it works. And they just have had, they said, great recruiting classes, and it's just really brought people back. And I think also, not to do too much marketing for this Run Elite program, but having athletes that went to BYU that are still there training that they can jump in and train with, I think has really helped bring the program up a little bit, because now these athletes that are coming to BYU can also train or see these Olympians, in their midst and train with them, and kind of, if you can see it, you can be it idea.
Now, the Olympics feature sports that you probably will only see, at least I will only focus on every 4 years. I was watching women's handball, for example, and I had to figure out the rules as the match went along. Enjoyed it. I don't know if there are any. Of course, they had breakdancing this Olympics. Any off the wall sports that you viewed there?
I always love to see fencing, actually. That's one of my favorite ones to see. I don't know what it is about it. I tried fencing once, and I know that it's very, very difficult, so maybe that's part of it. But it's also seems to be held in just beautiful places. So, yeah, the fencing I thought was really interesting. Yeah, the breakdancing. I think it'll probably, I don't know if it'll be its last Olympics. I think it was a hit, but it's not expected to be added to the LA games. So this may be its one and only shot. I'm trying to think what else I saw that was kind of offbeat. It's all a little bit of a blur, I have to say.
Yeah. So let's look ahead. The Paralympics coming up in a couple of weeks, right, in Paris?
Right. Yep. Yep.
Do we know if we have any Utah folks
We
competing?
do.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I haven't done all my research on them yet, but I do know that a few people reached out and said that they had qualified. So we will have several athletes. I know one is a fencer, and I think we have a climber. So yeah,
All right.
at least a couple.
All right, you'll be covering that as well. Then, of course, the Summer Games come next to United States, right? Los Angeles?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. LA hosts them in 2028. So that'll be exciting. Should be about the same time. I don't know the dates again exactly on those, but mid-July to beginning of August. It's usually the timeline. And they've added a few new sports, but most of them are team sports. So it's like lacrosse and flag football, and softball and baseball, I think.
Well, this will be a great run for the U.S. U.S., I think, along with Canada and Mexico, will host the World Cup in just 2 years. So this is a great run. Then 2034, Winter Olympics comes back to Salt Lake City.
Yeah, so that was one of the reasons to go to Paris, is that Salt Lake was expected to be officially given the 2034 Olympics, and the International Olympic Committee did do that, although with quite a bit more discussion than any of us were expecting.
Yeah, this had to do with testing for swimmers.
Yes, yeah, it's a little bit complicated. Not just testing for swimmers; it was more just so I'll try to make it brief, but these Chinese swimmers tested positive for heart medication known as TMZ several months before the 2021 Olympics, and WADA learned about it, and they didn't. Because of the pandemic, they couldn't go into China due to their own investigation, and they accepted China's reasoning or their finding that it was contamination of food at a hotel that caused this heart medication to somehow get into all their food and into their bodies. And so, but then WADA, also the World Anti-Doping Agency, did not disclose it to anyone, which is a little bit unusual. And so the U.S. took umbrage to that and basically was like, hey, this is helping these athletes train. And so that's why they did so well at the 2021 Olympics, because we think they're cheating and this World Anti-Doping Agency isn't doing anything about it. So we're going to take matters kind of into our own hands. So the U.S. started investigating, and the International Olympic Committee didn't really appreciate that. So they have asked Salt Lake City to agree to accept any rulings that WADA makes instead of pursuing it with the U.S.'s own legal system.
All right. Well, you'll be covering all of this. Very exciting. Salt Lake Tribune Outdoors reporter Julie Jag, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I know we have to let you go. I need to get on to other things. So thank you. Thank you very much. So you're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. And coming up following a break, here's the headline. After losing the GOP primary, Phil Lyman will run as a write-in candidate for Utah governor. We'll be talking about that following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. And we turn to State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern. Emily, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, of course, Tom.
So here's the headline. After losing the GOP primary, Phil Lyman will run as a write-in candidate for Utah governor. So you point out your story. Phil Lyman has a couple of lawsuits pending. We'll get to those, but so what do you need to do to run as a write-in candidate? Do you have to declare that? Because your name's not going to be on the ballot, but do you have to declare that you're doing that?
Yeah, you're supposed to declare your write-in candidacy with the lieutenant governor's office, and the deadline for that is September 3rd.
Okay, so that's coming up, but he apparently has said that he's going to do that. So tell us about he's got at least his campaign, he and his lieutenant governor have a couple lawsuits at least, right?
Yeah, so his lieutenant governor candidate, she is suing to try to get access to the signatures that Governor Spencer Cox collected to get onto the primary ballot in June. And, the state, that request has repeatedly been rejected. The State Records Committee rejected it. Those voter signatures are protected by law. Voters have the ability to protect their personal information when they sign candidate petitions. And the campaign is challenging that and wanting to see and verify the signatures themselves. I will say the signatures have been verified by the Davis County clerk, but the Lyman campaign isn't satisfied with that. And Phil Lyman also filed a lawsuit saying that he, essentially thinks that Governor Spencer Cox should be kicked off the ballot because he didn't win at the Utah Republican Party's state convention in April. Lyman got about 2/3 of delegates' support at that convention. And Lyman cites party rules and says that he should be on the ballot and should be the Republican nominee and not Spencer Cox, even though, Spencer Cox beat him by about 40,000 votes in the June primary among the wider electorate. And, actually earlier this week, the Supreme Court tossed that out and said that he hadn't stated a legal claim and that there wasn't factual basis for his demands. And, in the opinion, Chief Justice Matthew Durant wrote that the Supreme Court has previously tossed out arguments that the Utah Republican Party convention rules trump, what's in Utah's election laws. And I will say, I talked to the chair of the Utah Republican Party, Rob Axon. He is essentially on the same page. He said that Governor Spencer Cox is the Republican nominee after winning the primary. And he doesn't agree with Phil Lyman that party rules say that he should be on the ballot.
Representative Lyman, I think, is also saying that Lieutenant Governor Henderson and Governor Cox should be not only tossed off the ballot, but tossed out of office for malfeasance. What's he saying there?
Right. He's essentially saying that that they haven't done their job. And his claims really center around the them being on the ballot. He says that the ballot is a counterfeit ballot. He actually had asked the Utah Supreme Court to stop the printing of ballots because of that. And creating a counterfeit ballot would be a felony. And so he says that's malfeasance and that they should not be in office, and that the governor should be replaced by the Utah Senate President, Stuart Adams.
Lieutenant Governor Henderson issued a pretty strong statement about that.
Yeah, she's called it frivolous, a frivolous lawsuit. And, she said, in America, we don't win elections through the courts. We win or lose at the ballot box.
Representative Lyman will run as a third-party candidate. What's the Cox campaign saying about that? Or not third party, I'm sorry, but it's a write-in.
I spoke to the campaign manager for Governor Spencer Cox's campaign, and he said that essentially the fact that Phil Lyman is running as a write-in candidate signifies that he knows his legal challenges aren't, I guess there isn't much backing to them. And he also said that he feels that move only serves to help Democrats in the upcoming election.
Of course, Representative Brian King is the gubernatorial candidate for the Democrats. Is he saying anything about this?
Yeah, well, he, has essentially said anyone who's not satisfied with Governor Spencer Cox, we welcome you to vote for me, essentially. And he actually dropped an ad with Phil Lyman yesterday in which the two talked about how neither of them want Governor Spencer Cox to be reelected.
I should also note that Colby Jenkins' suit was also rejected by the Supreme Court. He's running in, was it the 2nd district? And
right, the 2nd congressional district. And so Representative Celeste Malloy is officially reelected, or officially the Republican nominee to be reelected to head back to Congress.
And I think he was saying that some ballots in southern Utah were, I guess, sent to Las Vegas to be processed, and that made them late. And so if those were counted, he could win, which is, somewhat plausible because he only lost by 169 votes.
Yeah, that's part of, what he's brought up. And it's a change that the U.S. Postal Service made. It's impacted a number of rural communities. And the Supreme Court ended up throwing out his case too.
Yeah, I think they said, well, their voters have other remedies. They could vote earlier, they could vote in person, they could drop it in the drop box. Anyway, so I'd like to move to another story, Emily, I think just published this morning or yesterday. Here's the headline: Should Utah's social media limits for minors start in October? Opponents argue kids have something important to say. So this is a law passed by the legislature. Tell us about that law first.
Yeah, so that law was passed actually this last legislative session, but it was the second swing that Utah lawmakers were taking at essentially limiting what they say is social media's negative health impacts on the state's kids. The law, it would require social media companies to make a number of big changes to their websites for users under 18. It would require social media companies to verify every user's age in the state. And also, when those users are under 18, they would have default privacy settings that would make it so that their account isn't visible to anyone who they're not connected with as a friend or a mutual follower. and it controls, what personal data the company can collect from those kids. And the settings, they can be changed, but only with a parent's consent. And so that law is being challenged in federal court right now by NetChoice, which is a conglomerate of social media companies, and it represents some of the largest social media companies that people are familiar with, like the parent company of Facebook and Instagram, Meta, and as well as Snap, the parent company of Snapchat and X. But it's also part of the lawsuit is also from a Utahn who testified against some of these laws as in front of the legislature as a 16-year-old.
It's interesting, those arguing against this law, the implementation of this law, cite climate activist Greta Thunberg, right, who say she began advocating for environmental issues at 15 years old. They say if she were a Utahn, this law were in place, she couldn't have been online advocating.
Right. Yeah, that's what attorneys for NetChoice were saying. And, they argued that if there is political speech that young people under 18 want to make, they wouldn't be able to make it to the wider public because their posts would be protected, and who was able to view them would be limited. An attorney for NetChoice said that, that there are minors in Utah who are like that, who have something important to say, and that it's not, that it violates their First Amendment rights to limit their ability to speak out on issues, and that includes political issues. The federal judge who was listening to the hearing on Wednesday seemed to, give some credence to that argument and question the state on some of the First Amendment rights of young people.
The judge seemed to say, or maybe said explicitly, I can't remember, you better have a pretty clear line between, harm. You better be able to prove harm to minors. The state says they can, right?
Yeah, the state has, submitted some evidence around that. But there are questions that some of the attorneys that are challenging the law have raised about just how robust that evidence is and whether it actually shows a causal link between social media and the mental health issues that many of the state's youth are dealing with.
So you note in your story there's a second Utah law passed this year which allows minors themselves, or I guess their families, to sue social media companies. I guess that would still be in force even if the judge rules against this other law?
Right. So there were this last session, there was a pair of laws that were passed together. And one of them gave minors a right of action against social media companies if they experience mental health problems that tie back to the platforms. And that law isn't being challenged in court. And so, I spoke to the state lawmaker who sponsored that bill and was the House sponsor for the bill that's being challenged. He was there at the hearing on Wednesday, State Representative Jordan Tusher. And, he said that while they hope, of course, that the law being challenged goes into effect, they think that having the law in place that gives minors that right of action, that right to sue social media companies, could result in some of the same, controls from social media companies that they're hoping to force them to implement. He says it could result in some of the same controls so that, these social media companies will limit their liability in the state.
Just about a minute left, Emily. I'd like to just have you mention another story of yours, illustrating that though Utah is a very red state, not a swing state, campaigns do reach out. I guess Gwen Walls, wife of Tim Walls, had a Zoom call with some supporters in Utah.
Yeah, last night, I joined her Zoom call with a number of Utah women who are supporting Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz's campaign for the White House. And the Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, his wife, Gwen Walz, she joined the call and just talked a little bit about why she thinks it's important that her husband be elected. uh, she talked about she's an educator and Governor Walz is an educator. And she talked about, she told stories from that and how she thinks that gives him experience that he would need to be in that position. And she also criticized some of the platform of former President Donald Trump's campaign as he runs to be elected to the White House again. And she talked about how that would impact public education and how it would impact access to various forms of reproductive care, including in vitro fertilization, which she and her husband use to have their children.
All right. State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern telling us about all these stories. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking with UPR and Salt Lake Tribune Cache Valley reporter Clarissa Casper. Here's the headline. Forget the Bear Lake monster. This northern Utah jewel faces a bigger threat. We'll have more following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. We turn next to Utah Public Radio and Salt Lake Tribune Cache Valley reporter Clarissa Casper. Clarissa, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And welcome. You've not been on the program before here, although I see you in the hallways here at UPR, so thank you.
Yes.
So you had an interesting couple stories about Bear Lake. First of all, situate Bear Lake for us. This is far northern Utah, so far north that it also goes up into Idaho, right?
Yeah, the lake is like almost equally divided between Idaho and Utah.
So this story talks about some threats to the lake. This would be important to any lake, but this is a big recreational area. And this lake is especially beautiful. Turquoise blue waters. It's just a great place to recreate.
Yeah, yeah. It's commonly been referred to as the Caribbean of the West. Yeah, it has very blue turquoise waters, and they're known to be very clear and just beautiful.
So you talk about three threats in particular. Let's start with trash. I guess the trash has increased. Why?
Yeah, so tourism to Bear Lake has increased. I think some experts I talked to said like almost by 300%. So they're seeing around 40,000 visitors to the lake each weekend, which is just a lot more than usual. And people are just not picking up after themselves at the lake. And I spoke to Bear Lake Watch director Brady Long, and he goes out every day to kind of monitor the trash situation. And he said he goes out on his sea kayak and just sees thousands of pieces of trash in the water. And he takes his daughter, Amber Long, who I featured in the article, to go pick up trash because it's like her favorite hobby. And just the shorelines are just crowded with so much trash, lots of beer cans, lots of just, yeah, people not picking up after themselves after having fun on the lake.
I guess trash in the water as well, so it's pretty bad. By the way, Amber sounds really cute, 7 years old.
Yeah,
She says it helps the lake feel better if you pick up that trash.
yeah, she was very cute.
So the trash, I guess you can solve that problem by we just need to do a better job picking up the trash. A couple of those other threats are maybe a little harder to deal with. Let's talk about the plants, aquatic invaders. Tell me what are these plants?
Yeah, so there's multiple invasive plants in the lake currently. The biggest one is Eurasian water milfoil, which is just this really aggressive weed that can get taken to the lake by the tiniest speck on a boat, like a tiny bit of the plant can come on a paddleboard, something where someone didn't rinse their boat or recreation gear off before they got in the lake, and it can just spread so rapidly. And it's experts from both Idaho and Utah and activists have said that it's just taking over. And if you go to the lake, you can actually see this plant in the water all over the place. And the other one is curly leaf pondweed, which is very similar to Eurasian water milfoil. But the problem with these plants is they choke out the native plants. They cloud habitat for native fish. And Bear Lake is home to, I think, 4 fish species that are unique to Bear Lake only. So, yeah, if these plants don't stop growing, we could potentially lose these very unique fish.
I guess these plants also could get tangled up in a jet ski, right? Plug up irrigation pipes. So these are troublesome.
If the plants made their way into the canal system, I was told that could cause a lot of problems for farmers. I talked to an employee at Bear Lake Rentals, I think, and he said that this year the problem has just made his and his coworkers' lives extremely hard. They have to go out and untangle all their jet skis. It can damage the equipment. It's just nasty. That's how he described it, as nasty stuff.
And perfect habitat for mosquitoes. So just add insult to injury.
A bonus.
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah. So, and apparently these plants are behaving in a weird way in Bear Lake. They usually grow vertically, I guess. And in this lake, they're growing horizontally.
Yeah. So yeah, Jessie Daninger with Utah Fire Forest and State Lands. She said that in other places where this plant has been documented, which is other parts of the U.S., it grows vertically, but here in Bear Lake, it's growing horizontally, which is making it hard to come up with plans to eradicate it because it's just not the exact same as it is in the places where they've come up with solutions.
So let's talk about the third threat to Bear Lake. That's sediment. Why? I guess more sediment. Why?
Yeah. So, in recent years, it goes back 100 years ago. The lake was converted from a natural lake into a reservoir by a power company in order to generate power. And when they did this, they instead of the water slowly seeping into Bear Lake from the wetland areas, which is kind of how a watershed works, the wetlands normally filter out the water and then it goes into the lake. They diverted the water so that now the water comes into Bear Lake through the Bear River and it comes shooting through the Bear River. And so, but before Mud Lake, which is a wetland area on the north end of the lake, it's also like a wildlife refuge for birds. It's been able to filter these sediments out before it reaches the lake. But now it's getting just oversaturated with sediments and it can't hold them all back. And with our recent high water years and our high runoff years, the Bear River, it's just shooting all these sediments in that the Mud Lake can't hold anymore. So yeah, and it's worse on high runoff years.
So one of the problems, before we get into solutions, you have a part 2 with solutions here. One of the problems is the lake, though the lake doesn't know it, is divided between 2 states, right? So there's apparently lack of coordination.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been told. The Utah side of things said that they don't really talk to the Idaho side, and the Idaho side that they don't really talk to the Utah side. And Bear Lake Watch, which collects data and funds just initiatives to protect the lake, kind of like Sageland Collaborative for the Great Salt Lake, similar to that kind of thing. They said that they're very concerned with the lack of coordination between the 2 sides. Yeah, because invasive species, they don't know state lines. So, but both sides of the lake said that they have efforts in place, but it just seems those efforts are not very coordinated.
So before we get into some of the solutions, you reference in your story the Bear Lake Monster. Some people may not know about the Bear Lake Monster. Tell us.
Yeah, so the Bear Lake Monster is like this very well-known thing in northern Utah. It's said that there is a serpent-like, dragon-like, giant creature that lives in the lake. Some people, I think that it originated because back in the 1860s or something, um, a LDS settler wrote an article for the Deseret News about this creature that he said lives in the lake. So ever since then, it's just kind of been this legend that this serpent, dragon, giant like creature lives in the waters of Bear Lake.
It's like the Loch Ness Monster. We have our own here at Bear Lake. So we talked about coordination, and that would be one solution, one helpful thing. I guess both sides, Utah and Idaho, treat this invasive plant. They try to kill it.
Yeah, so they, at least the Utah side, I know, has been going out this year with a chemical herbicide called Percellacor, and they've been killing the plant. The sad part is they do have to kill the native plants while they're killing this invasive plant because it's really, really hard to tell the two apart. They look like the exact same, and also they they're not willing to risk the two plants hybridizing because the hybrid can't be killed at all. So they're just like, we got to eradicate everything because the outcome would be worse if we didn't.
Wow, that's scary. That no known herbicide works against the hybrid, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess so. Back to coordination. One person in your story said that they're kind of jealous of the Great Salt Lake, which has a commissioner. They say Bear Lake needs a commissioner.
That was Brady Long, director of Bear Lake Watch. He says that the lake needs a commissioner like Brian Steed. There is a regional Bear Lake Commission, but he says that that group just doesn't have the correct authority to hold both state agencies on each side of the lake accountable to the highest degree. And when I talked to the Bear Lake Regional Commission, the director, Mitch Polson, said that he hadn't talked to either side of the lake about the issues in over a year. So it just seems, yeah. So Brady Long, he said, we need someone like Brian Steed who could really recognize how important this lake is and motivate both sides to do things to address the problems.
Now, what about sediment? What can be done about increased sediment?
So currently, there's nothing. There's no plans to address that. The U.S. Geological Survey is currently studying the flow to see how bad the problem is, and then that data could potentially inform some solutions. But some Utah State University students came up with some pretty far out there ideas on what they could do. One student in the Department of Landscape, Architecture, and Environmental Planning said that creating a new lake in the watershed before Mud Lake so that the sediment could settle there might be a good idea. And they could maybe pull that off by putting expensive waterfront homes on the new lake and getting the money to do that from them. And yeah, it's a pretty far out there idea, but the idea was presented to local leaders in Garden City to, just maybe encourage them to dream a little big.
No, a lot of people you talked to in the story said that this is, this problem's worrisome, right? But we're not going to destroy the lake immediately. They're trying to get a hold of the problem. But one person described a scenario in which we didn't get a hold of the problem, in which Bear Lake essentially turned into a swamp.
Yeah, he called it the swamp of the Rocky Mountains. He's Brady Long. He's just very concerned that if we don't address problems soon, that invasive plant could spread so rapidly. Those invasive plants, and also, with more and more sediment coming in, it could make the water less clear, muck it up, and the trash is just, it just wouldn't be the same Bear Lake that all Utahns know and love.
Could we just have you just say 30 seconds on another story, Clarissa? Here's the headline: Vandals cut down pride flags at Northern Utah LGBTQ Center again. This time they were caught on camera. And in fact, there is a photo here, of these people cutting down the flags. This has happened before. I guess it's happened again now.
Yeah. This happened before last month and then again on Friday, to Logan's Pride House in Cache Valley.
Are charges going to be filed? Do we know? I guess I don't know if we know these individuals. I don't know. You can see faces really, but you can see them cutting down the flags.
Yeah, they were both wearing masks. The police said that they don't have any leads on who they are, but they did take fingerprints at the scene of the crime, and they're sharing that video everywhere. So.
Okay. I guess just mention here we have just another 30 seconds. A big conference, been in Logan for what, almost 40 years. It's leaving. Tell us just very briefly about this.
Yeah, so the Small Satellite Conference, which has been held in Logan for nearly 4 decades, they announced at this year's conference that it has outgrown Cache Valley and it is leaving and going to the Salt Palace in Salt Lake City. They just want to be able to have the conference under one roof. But this conference is really, really cool. It attracts engineers and inventors and scientists from around the entire world. I met people from Scotland, people from Romania, just from everywhere. And they come together and they show their satellite ideas, and it's a really cool conference. I got to see so many tiny satellites, learn about different things that are being developed in the space industry. Yeah, so Salt Lake's lucky.
Yeah, we'll miss it here in Logan, but I guess our loss is their gain. We've been talking here with UPR and Cache Valley reporter for the Salt Lake Tribune, Clarissa Casper. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Tom.
Well, it's time now for our underplayed stories of the week. Emily Anderson-Stern, what's your underplayed story of the week?
I'd like to highlight one from Robert Kirky, which is just interesting about, I guess, the state of politics in Utah, where, he writes about how over the past 20 years, there have only been a total of 18 independent candidates running for state and federal offices. But this year there are 13, which, he writes after talking to people, shows that there's a deep sense of frustration with the two-party system in Utah.
Yeah, interesting story. sltrib.com to get that and all the stories we've been talking about. Clarissa Casper, what's your underplayed story of the week?
So I really liked a story by Carmen Nesbitt, education reporter, about detailing how a book can now get banned in Utah. A new law allows for books to be banned from all public schools if they meet a certain criteria. And I really liked the article because it included reactions from literary advocates and authors who are arguing that this law limits access to diverse and valuable reading materials. So far, 13 books have already been pulled off the shelves due to this law, including books by Judy Blume and Margaret Atwood. So it was a very interesting article.
Find that at sltrib.com as well. I'll just mention a story by Sophia Jeremias. She looked at specific problems for people in rural Utah regarding healthcare. Very interesting story. Check that out also at sltrib.com. Well, we've been talking with Salt Lake Tribune State Watch reporter Emily Anderson-Stern. Emily, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
Thank you. And Utah Public Radio and Salt Lake Tribune Cache Valley reporter Clarissa Casper has been with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks, everyone, for listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Hope you join us again next time. We'll mention we'll have a special broadcast of the program in 2 weeks from Moab. So you hope you'll join us for that, as well as the next week's program. Thanks, everyone, for listening.